After months of negotiations, the fate of a bipartisan infrastructure bill seems somewhat less certain. As many expected, Republicans voted to block consideration of its framework. Today's vote tally was 49 to 51. It needed 60 votes to advance. Despite the apparent setback, negotiators are still hoping to hash out a deal early next week. Democratic Senator Jon Tester told CBSN earlier that both sides were very close to reaching an agreement following more negotiations last night.
We are very, very, very close, Vlad. I think that, in the next few hours, we'll be ready to start putting down text on this bill. There was two pretty minor things that are being negotiated right now as we speak. And I think it's going to come to a point where this bill is going to be ready for prime time. And that's going to be good for the country. And I think it's going to be a sign to the world that the United States government can still function.
Meanwhile, another battle is taking shape over federal spending. The Congressional Budget Office says the government will hit the debt ceiling by early fall. With a 2019 borrowing agreement set to expire on July 31st, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is warning that his party won't vote for a clean increase. Instead, he's telling Democrats to include the spending hike in their reconciliation bill. Democrats have promised to pass a budget resolution before the August recess, but it's likely to be several more months before they try to pass the actual $3.5 trillion package. Earlier, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer slammed McConnell for playing politics.
We just heard Leader McConnell's statements on debt ceiling. The leader's statements on debt ceiling are shameless, cynical, and totally political. This debt is Trump debt. It's COVID debt. Democrats joined 3 times during the Trump administration to do the responsible thing. And the bottom line is that Leader McConnell should not be playing political games with the full faith and credit of the United States. Americans pay their debts.
Plus, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pulled all of his Republican members from a House committee investigating the Capitol riot. He says they'll launch their own investigation. McCarthy announced the decision after Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected 2 of his picks for what she said was threatening the integrity of the investigation.
Is she afraid of a question from Jim? Is she afraid what he might ask or fight for? He's a ranking member, not his first committee, but his second. Why would she be afraid? Did she set the committee itself to be one-sided? Yes. More so than any select committee before? Yes, she did. We warned you from that moment in time she was playing politics. Today just showed the American people exactly what everybody was wanting.
For more, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zeke Miller, and Tyler Pager. Caitlin is CBSN's Washington reporter. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Tyler is a White House reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Caitlin, let me start with you. What did Maine's Senator, Republican Susan Collins, offer Majority Leader Schumer in exchange for delaying this vote, which he did not do?
Hi, Elaine. Well, Collins and Rob Portman and other Republicans signed on to a letter earlier today urging Schumer to push back a vote on opening debate on infrastructure to give them a little more time to be able to get some of this framework together and get something more tangible than what they have now. And they said, look, if you can move this back until Monday, we'll be ready by then, and we'll actually commit then to voting to proceed on debating this bill. Schumer, however, held the vote today, and we saw the party breakdown of that. All Republicans voting no, all Democrats voting yes. Chuck Schumer himself, of course, voted no so that he's able to bring it back later on, and that's what we're waiting to see, kind of what the timeline is there. So these Republicans were essentially saying, look, we're not ready yet, but we will be. You have a lot of progressives up here on Capitol Hill who are very concerned about Republicans and whether they're just trying to kind of stall and take up time. There is a urgency on their part, on Democrats, to get something done here on infrastructure. But there's also at the same time a political and incentive for Republicans as well. They don't control anything in Washington, as we know, but if they are able to get some kind of bipartisan deal here and to be able to go back to their constituents and sell it, that could be something that they would be incentivized to do, especially since our own polling shows that the broad parameters of this kind of narrower definition of infrastructure, this more traditional definition of infrastructure, is broadly popular. Our own polling shows that 87% of Americans want investments in roads and bridges and traditional infrastructure. And we're also seeing vast majority bipartisan support among Americans for investments in things like broadband and also in things like elderly care and child care. So there are some political incentives here for Republicans, which is why they want to get something through here. But what exactly that path is remains to be seen. They all released a statement after the vote, this bipartisan group, saying that in the coming days they'll be releasing or prepared to release a framework. Note coming days and not a specific timeline.
All right, so Zeke, with all of that in mind, what are the next steps here? The vote failed. You have the bipartisan group working on it, saying that they've made significant progress. What happens at this point now?
Well, as Caitlin said, these negotiators are going to keep negotiating, doing just that, trying to get this framework done and then getting legislative text drafted, getting that legislative text scored so that there can be a true dollar figure attached to it. And then their hope is that all the math will align, that the pay-fors that they've put together and sort of cobbled together to cover the cost of this bill match what the estimated cost is. And if not, then can they rally enough Republican votes there, especially to commit to some sort of deficit spending deal? But I think what we saw today was Congress, as we know, really only does anything when it faces a deadline, either an urgent crisis or some sort of procedural deadline. Whether the debt ceiling debates looking over the last decade, the debt ceiling only gets passed at the very, very last minute, and sometimes it causes government shutdown to get it done. What we saw today by Leader Schumer was an attempt to set an artificial deadline to keep those negotiators on track. It doesn't seem to have created a lot of ill will on the part of some of these Republicans who didn't want to do this right now. But the question is, as Caitlin said, what does coming days mean? Is it Monday? Is it sooner? Or is it potentially later?
All right. Well, Tyler, is this a situation where Senator Schumer loses the battle and potentially wins the war? And what is the White House doing to blunt Democratic criticisms of this failed vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Majority Leader Schumer is hoping for, is that this was an opportunity to put the Democrats and Republicans on the record and show that he is not just going to wait endlessly for this package to move forward. And I think they're optimistic, at least Democrats are, that this vote is an opportunity to push the momentum forward and eventually get to a deal on infrastructure. And from the statement we saw from the bipartisan group after the vote failed, it seemed like it did have that effect. They were, as you played the interview earlier with Senator Tester, they look like they are moving forward. He said that there are a few minor things that they're working out. But I think as Zeke and Caitlin both said, this is, an opportunity to put a deadline and push the senators to not just wait endlessly and really come to a deal. And, the White House is doing similarly. They, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, put out a tweet this week saying that they stand behind Schumer and his schedule for pushing this forward. They have been very careful to ensure that they're in lockstep as they move through this process, especially because of the various moving parts here, right? This is the first piece of a two-pronged approach to try to push through an expansive infrastructure package. They still have that reconciliation bill, which they're hoping to pass along party lines. And I think they're eager to show the American people that they can get results, right? They don't just want to be seen as talking about this endlessly. They want to, as Biden has said, show that democracy can work. And for them, they have the opportunity to do that twice. Once on this bipartisan bill, which is a huge priority for the president, who has vowed that he can work across party lines to get things done. And then two, with this reconciliation bill, which is going, if it does pass along with Democrats only supporting it, the opportunity to, pursue a more expansive definition of infrastructure and really tick off some of the administration's top priorities.
And Zeke, as Minority Leader McConnell sounds the alarm on the debt ceiling, let's go back to former Treasury Secretary Mnuchin in 2017.
I would also like to emphasize for this committee and for the rest of Congress I urge you to raise the debt limit before you leave for the summer. We can all discuss how we cut spending in the future and how we deal with the budgets going forward, but it is absolutely critical that where we've spent money, that we keep the credit of the United States as the most critical issue. It is the reserve currency of the world, and we need to make sure that we can raise our debt ceiling to pay our debts.
All right, Zeke, so now in 2021, what is behind the newfound Republicans' concern over debt? And should we expect to hear more about this?
I think certainly we should expect to be hearing a lot more about this over the coming months. This is a pattern. We saw Republicans repeatedly vote to raise the debt limit during the Trump presidency to pay for things like the Trump tax cuts, but also a couple of rounds of COVID relief. Some that were included in that. This is not new as an issue, and Republicans, when they are out of power, tend to use the debt ceiling as just another cudgel to against Democrats as sort of big, quote unquote, big spending Democrats playing into sort of traditional partisan divides. Democrats don't have, they've argued for a decade or more now that the debt ceiling is sort of artificial. National debt in general, that maybe it should be the debt limit should be eliminated entirely. Let the U.S. government borrow what it needs to borrow to fund what it needs to do. Republicans, catering to sort of the more sort of smaller government voters out there, have argued, that this needs to be reined in. But we hear a lot from Republican politicians on the stump about that, and we heard a lot from President Trump about former President Trump about balancing the budget while he was in office. In fact, led to he left office with some of the largest deficits we have seen in our nation's history. So this is all politics. At the same time, what Mitch McConnell is doing here is essentially telling Chuck Schumer, our voter, his members want to keep this political issue alive for themselves in their 2022 races and beyond. They want to hold themselves out as sort of anti-big government spending and let the Democrats be the party of government spending. Democrats are going to, whether or not they can get that reconciliation bill done is sort of a separate question. But if they do, they're going to be the party of big spending anyway. So this doesn't really change the political calculus for Democrats. But it does sort of, it is an attempt by Republicans to sort of go back to that old trope of, pointing fingers at Democrats for spending that, in this case, a lot of it that was run up under their watch.
Right. So, Caitlin, if Democrats unite around a larger reconciliation bill, Republicans won't be able to stop it, but they can try to shape public opinion of it. Is that the strategy, basically what Zeke just laid out, to look at this as an issue that they can rally members around, this idea of Democrats being profligate spenders here and Republicans being, once again, the party, as they have put it in the past, of fiscal responsibility?
That's exactly right, and Zeke laid that out really well, especially heading into the midterms, and we've already heard that from Republicans, even as they're working together on this bipartisan deal. They're saying, look, we are not supporting this reconciliation package. We have nothing to do with that, and we're not going to provide the votes for it. And in their view, they think it's an example of this, quote, runaway spending that McConnell and others have been talking about, especially as we've been seeing, this issue for the White House in terms of rising inflation. And again, if that becomes something that's not temporary, as the White House is arguing it is now, if that becomes a longer term issue, that could feed into that. So this is certainly part of their midterm message, which is why they don't have a problem not getting on board with it. But on the other side, you have Democrats who have been pushing for these issues that are included in that reconciliation bill, the so-called investments in human infrastructure. And when you talk to party strategists and lawmakers up here on the Democratic side, they say, look, we told our voters that these are the issues that we want to push. And if we aren't able to deliver on them, does that, start to depress Democratic turnout in the midterms? As we know, midterms are very much base-oriented elections, and that's how we're seeing kind of both sides play it when it comes to this larger reconciliation bill. You also have Democrats up here saying, look, why have power if you can't use it? So let's go big and bold on this now. And especially if the midterm elections look to be an uphill battle for Democrats, which they do, they could be running out of time to actually get their priorities passed if it doesn't look like they'll be able to hold the House and Senate next year.
All All right, on another topic, Tyler, the White House announced an upcoming meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. What do you make of the timing, and what will they focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, again, something that Biden has prioritized as he looks toward foreign policy, is strengthening relations with Western allies, but also bolstering America's relationships with countries near Russia, right? And so Zelensky is someone that the Biden administration has targeted as someone they want to build a better relationship with. And I think this is an opportunity for Biden to reward him for, not going toward Russia and working with the United States and its Western allies. And so this visit comes as Biden has hosted a growing number of foreign leaders. He started with Japan's foreign minister, and most recently hosted a number of officials, including the German chancellor, as she was on her way out of her term. And so I think this is, again, showing, America trying to strengthen its alliances abroad, but also sending a sign to Russia about encroachment and the various issues that Biden worked that Biden talked to with Putin at the summit they had in Geneva. And I think this also comes amid news today about Nord Stream 2, the pipeline between Germany and Russia that the United States had opposed and finally signed off on as part of a deal in which they are ensuring that Germany is going to make investments in Ukraine. This comes, as U.S. senators, or both Democrats and Republicans, are criticizing the Biden administration over this issue because of concerns that Russia could grow its influence in Western Europe, particularly over oil and gas. So I think this is an important announcement in tandem with this decision over Nord Stream 2, which has been a source of controversy and concern up on Capitol Hill and throughout the administration.
Yeah, we have seen that Nord Stream 2 issue really bubble up here, as you note, bipartisan concern over that. Zeke, on another topic, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pulled all of his members from the January 6th committee after two of them were initially rejected by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. How did things reach this point, and how does this bode for the future of the investigation?
And this really started once on January 6th, when there was initial calls for a bipartisan commission, almost 9/11 style commission, to investigate what went wrong that day. Talks on that petered out. And then there were several rounds of negotiation on some sort of bipartisan or bipartisan committee that petered out, and now here we are with the select committee, which is sort of convened unilaterally by the speaker, and she got to pick her 8, and McCarthy got to pick his 5 here. His 5, 2 of them included Jim Banks and Jim Jordan. Those congressmen both opposed the certification of various states' electors on January 6th and into that early morning of January 7th. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that is sort of a disqualifying act on their part, and refused to name them to the committee at the recommendation of McCarthy. The consequences of this, this was always going to be spun by Republicans as a partisan commission because there was not a bipartisan agreement on there. This just furthers that Republican talking point. In the long term, though, even if these 5 Republicans are not on the committee, there is a quorum on the select committee. Right now, it is bipartisan with the inclusion of Liz Cheney. So Democrats will have subpoena power, will have the ability to do some investigation. So that investigation will likely continue regardless of this move. But we'll see. This is just going to raise the partisan rhetoric, the temperature of the partisan rhetoric in Washington in the months to come. And it's really hard to imagine, given how tense things have been, particularly around this issue for the last 6.5 months. It's only going to get sharper as this investigation continues.
Yeah, and Caitlin, just after Minority Leader McCarthy's press conference, Congresswoman Liz Cheney spoke on the Capitol steps about the committee. Let's listen to some of that.
I am absolutely confident that we will have a nonpartisan investigation, that it will look at the facts, that it will go wherever the facts may lead. There are 3 members that the minority leader proposed that the speaker did not object to. She has objected to 2 members, and the rhetoric around this from the minority leader and from those 2 members has been disgraceful. This must be an investigation that is focused on facts, and the idea that any of this has become politicized is really unworthy of the office that we all hold and unworthy of our republic.
Cheney was forced out of party leadership. Former President Trump is working to oust her from her seat. What does it mean for Congresswoman Cheney politically to be the sole Republican on this committee?
That's right. No love lost between Cheney and McCarthy. That is for sure, given that thought you just played. But the issue here is that Cheney has become an outlier within her own party. We have seen over the course of the past 6 months after the attack on the Capitol that Republicans have, started to downplay what happened. We actually see that reflected in our polling too out this week. And so you have Republicans united around where McCarthy is, which is embracing the former president, hoping that that kind of embrace will help them turn out their voters, their base voters in the midterms. Meanwhile, Cheney has kind of made it her brand to kind of, clap back at her own party from within it, but hasn't yet proven a constituency for that. Now, she has been able to fundraise prolifically, but again, she is more of an outlier than representative of the party. So we'll see kind of what this commission can bring, but expect more of that from Cheney because this has become kind of her platform.
Yeah, as Zeke said, a lot more of this sharp rhetoric, sure to get even more sharp here as the weeks go on. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zeke Miller, and Tyler Pager, great to have you all. Thank you.